Hi, I'm Sandy from Sandy Creates Cards and More. I am an independent Stampin' Up demonstrator. And today we'll be making a card similar to this. Same layout, we'll just be using different colors. I'm also going to show you how I colored this piece of background paper. And I'm going to show you the heat embossing process because these flowers were heat embossed before I colored them. We're going to be using the Blended Seasons stamp sets. This was a package of 2. So I'm going to be using this flower, and I'm going to be using Wishing You All the Best Sentiment. And this was part of the bundle. These are the Stitched Seasons Framelits, and we're going to be using the largest framelit to die cut our colored piece. We'll also be using Versamark ink that will help us in the embossing process, and Coastal Cabana ink, and this detailed trio punch. It's a pretty neat punch. It cuts that design that's in the corner of the card. If you use this section, it will make a nice just rounded corner, and this section will cut a little hole so it's perfect for a tag or something you want to put a piece of ribbon or string through. Just set that all aside. I want to start by showing you that process for that background sheet. I'm just going to get out this plastic mat to cover my work surface. This is the color scheme we're going to use today. You're going to need an A2 size card base, regular 5 1/4 by 4 piece of cardstock. This is Pear Pizzazz. A piece of Whisper White, and this is, I think, 5 by 3 3/4. This is to stamp your flower on. And I have 2 pieces of watercolor paper, and that's what I use for that framelit piece. It's just a scrap piece of paper for when we do our embossing. Let me set these aside. We don't get them all wet. I'm just going to shake this up a little bit. This is the just water and our stamping spritzer, and I put 5 drops of color in there, and that's just because this is a pretty light ink. If I was using something darker, I probably would use a little less of the inker. I'm standing up because I want to spray this a little bit from a distance. And you're just going to spray until you're happy with the amount of color you have on there. I kind of like that. I'm just going to set that aside to dry. I set another mat here. The second way I do this, slightly different effect. This time I'm going to spray right directly onto my plastic placemat. And I set the piece of cardstock, and again, this is watercolor paper, just down. And lift it up. And you see, sometimes you get a little bit of wavy lines to it. Sometimes you get a nice solid color. It all is going to depend on how much you spray onto your sheet. We're going to set that one aside to dry as well. But I have already done the same process on another piece, which has now been thoroughly dried. And I have cut it out with that large framelit. This is the card pieces we're going to be putting together today. Heat embossed and colored with Pool Party, Old Olive, and Daffodil, the light Stampin Blends. And you can see every card you make is going to be a little bit different, but I usually start by coloring the leaf or the flowers with the lighter of the two colors in the set, going back and outlining then the outside edges. And then from there it's really just blending, and stop when you have it the way you like it. I'm not going to do any coloring today. I think we all know how to color. You could use your regular Stampin' Right markers to do this. You could use watercolor pencils to do this, or just regular colored pencils. But I do want to show you that heat embossing process. So I'm just going to use a different color, something that I can use in another card in the future. And this is regular Whisper White. I'm going to take this little embossing buddy, and I'm just going to brush this over this piece of paper. That way, if you have any oils on the card from just touching the card, it should help to keep that embossing powder from sticking in those spots. And it always will stick in spots that you don't want, I find anyway. And if that happens, you can just brush it off with your fingers, or you can use a little paintbrush, which I usually have handy when I'm embossing. So this is Versamark, the Versamark ink. And because it's a large stamp, I've already got it set on a clear block. And I'm going to cover the surface. Stamp a couple times. I haven't re-inked this for a while, and so I want to make sure I get good coverage. And we're going to just stamp that down onto the card. A little pressure behind it. And lift it up. I'm not sure if you can quite see that. I can, but whether you can see it or not, you know it's there. I'm going to set our piece on just a scrap piece of copy paper, actually. And we're going to sprinkle on our embossing powder. Be pretty generous of it. You end up just putting it right back. This color is actually Blueberry Bushel. I'm gonna tap the back of that. I don't see any. I don't really see any big blobs anywhere. I think we're good. Even if there were a little few pieces extra embossing powder around the edge, be fine. We're going to end up, as we did for this card, by fussy cutting it out, so that won't affect the finished process. My heat tool, now this is going to make a little bit of noise. Get it warmed up, and I'm going to heat emboss. There, that looks good. You can actually see the powder melting when you look up close. Really, really nice effect. I'm going to set that aside. I'll use that for another card. From that point, the next thing I do is I fussy cut out that flower. And there's this little stem, and I always cut that off when I am doing my fussy cutting. I cut that piece out first. It just makes it a little tight corner for me to cut. And sometimes I'll put the piece back when I lay it down onto my mat. Sometimes I don't. It just depends on on the card and what size sentiment I use. But one of the things I do is I take a Stampin' Right marker and I use the brush end of that marker to color the outside edges for a couple reasons. You can see that when I fussy cut, you can see a little bit of the white on the outside edges. And I could trim and trim and trim, but I don't want to trim off that nice embossed edge. And so what I do with anytime I fussy cut, I take a marker that matches and I just draw it, holding that. Sometimes I have to fill in a little sort of blank spot there. Just holding that from the back. That way you can see if it, sometimes you're over the edge a little bit. You don't want that to be on the front of your card. You want it on the back where you can't see it. It just takes a little bit of time. But again, some of the corners, a little dip. I think I've got it all. I'm just holding it against the darker card. Yeah, I think we're good. Make sure you put your covers back on really tight, your markers, so they don't dry out. So next we are going to stamp our sentiment. Some of this embossing powder off of here. And I'm going to do that using my Misti. It's a stamp positioning tool. And I do this because of the texture on this card. Sometimes that will keep you from getting a nice solid stamp. And if you don't use a stamping tool, you're not going to be able to stamp that a second time and get it in the same position. So let me get our sentiment. Wishing you all the best. Slide this up out of this corner so we have plenty of room here. These magnet pieces, they just help to hold your piece of paper really tight so that if you end up having to stamp a second time, it won't shift. I apologize if my head is in the way there. Just want to get a nice angle, filling in that space in the corner. I think that looks pretty good there. Once you've stamped, of course, you can't change where you've stamped that piece, where you can always move this around. I think that's good there. So as you set this down on a rubber stamp, it will pick that stamp right up. I'm going to use the Coastal Cabana ink. not really applying pressure or a lot of pressure on this. You just want to give it a time for that ink to sink into the paper. That's not bad. I'm going to give it one more quick coat. I'm using Coastal Cabana instead of the Pool Party ink that I colored. Well, I use Stampin Blends that I colored with, because you just need to have that little bit of contrast. Next, we're going to take our paper and we're going to cut those corners. Again, trying to keep my head out of the camera. You can see these two little edges. That helps you to guide your paper. And you want to make sure you push your paper right against those two corners. Get a nice, even stamp in each corner. It just gives us a little bit of contrast. That's so much better than just setting a flat piece of paper there. Let's go ahead and glue down our flower. I'm using Tombow glue for that. You can use tape runner, but because this paper is pretty saturated with alcohol from the Stampin Blends and embossing, all of that, I just want to make sure we get a nice contact with the paper. And the glue also gives me the ability to move this around a little bit if I want to. And yep, left enough room. I'm going to see the tip on this. I colored around the edges of this earlier, but I probably cut afterwards. A little bit there. And just a couple drops of glue. And I can see where I cut that off. I'm just pressing it right back up against there. I don't think you'd be able to tell that that had been cut off. It really does make the fussy cutting process a lot easier. Okay, we're going to use some tape runner to apply this to our mat. And before I set it down onto the paper, I'm just sort of siding top, bottom, two sides. Make sure it looks like I'm in the center of my paper. And get the corners well here. Make sure you have your card base lined up in the right direction. I'm siding the three sides. This edge, and this edge, making sure they all about the same distance. Then I sort of look across this top edge as I start to set it down a little bit more. Look to make sure this edge looks about the same size as here. and just set my piece down. So nice press from the back side. It helps to get all those pieces intact. So there we go. I love this flower. I love this framelit and the sentiment. I love this card. So here was our original when I was. And here are the other examples that I was going to show you. I've made several with this. This is the same card, very similar to what we just made. The difference is this wasn't heat embossed, the edging. And this one, I actually heat embossed with gold embossing powder. Switch this up a little bit. Instead of using the frame, I've put paper behind the cutout instead and popped up a sentiment on it. This one I've done the same thing. Use this frame. So anytime I cut out of a piece of cardstock, I save that outside edge to use for another card. Congratulations card. In this case, instead of fussy cutting, I have stamped right onto my piece of paper. Here's another one. Here I've popped up. I've made a frame out of the two largest framelits in that set and popped up the flower cut. Here's another one where I've stamped straight onto a piece of paper, and I used a different framelit shape on this card. I think there's lots of possibilities, which is why I love this. I love color. I love flowers. And yeah, I love all of these cards. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and we'll give this layout a try. As always, I'll have a full material list in the description box below and links to my stamping website, my blog, and Pinterest page. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.